Today on Pitchside Weekly, we've got the handball rule that is just ruining the game right now. We got a lot of top teams struggling all across Europe, and I can tell you which ones to be concerned about. And of course, as always, goals of the week. Stay tuned right here on Pitchside Weekly.
Oh yeah. I'm not the type of brother to play with. See a lot of people acting like all ball players sounding like haters. We the young kings of this generation,
What's up, y'all? Welcome back. Pitchside with Parker. It is Tuesday morning, and I am so excited to get into everything that has been happening over the past weekend. It was a nice weekend of soccer. And before we get into that, I do want to make sure, go ahead and subscribe if you're new around here. I know there's also been a lot of new people coming to the channel recently, so if you're new, welcome. This is my kind of weekly series where I kind of do a news recap of everything that I've been watching over the past week. It's going to be a lot of the top stories, and we get down to business. Be sure to like this video as well. The target is 10 likes on every single video, so go ahead and do that right now before we get started. Also, follow me on Twitter. Link is in the description. But I post a lot of updates about the videos and tweet about all the stuff that I talk about in the videos as well. So stay connected with me on there. I'll give you a follow back. And last but not least, tomorrow there will be a huge video coming out. I did my first interview on the channel, and it's with an NWSL player. So I need y'all to go crazy on that video. If you're watching this later and the video's already posted, go watch it. I need y'all to run that one up. It was such a good interview, and I'm really excited to have it on the channel. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into Pitchside Weekly. Unfortunately, the biggest story this week, especially in English football, had to do with refereeing and the handball rule. There were so many penalties given this weekend. There were so many penalties not given this weekend. Several games where the outcome was decided by the inconsistency of the handball rule as it is written right now, and the use of VAR, which seems to just make it all worse. And that is where we're going to start this week. First, if you look at the Brighton Man U game, Brighton was actually really unlucky in this game. And after equalizing in the 95th minute, and there was only 5 minutes of added time, Man U was given a penalty in the 97th minute, which was scored in the 100th minute, that got them the 3-2 win, and it was off a handball. Then you look at the Tottenham-Newcastle game. Tottenham dominated Newcastle. Newcastle literally had one shot on target the entire game, and it was a handball penalty in the 97th minute as well. Tottenham did not deserve to tie that game. And then you look at the Everton-Crystal Palace game. Everton ends up winning 2-1. The winning goal, a penalty from a handball from Joel Ward. Now, you could get into how much of a handball each one of these was, but what I want to do is I'm going to put up pictures of 4 or 5 different scenarios from this weekend, and you tell me which ones of these were handballs, which ones of them were not. It's so hard to discriminate, and it feels like every single ref almost has a little bit of a different criteria. And clearly at this point, there's a different criteria for attackers versus defenders. Last season, it was kind of flipped around the other way, where it seemed like attackers were penalized more heavily than defenders. Anytime the ball struck your hand at all in the lead up to a goal, it was disallowed last season. And I think that was a little over the top, so I'm glad they changed it. But it seems like the opposite is in place this year, where if the ball hits a defender's arm in the penalty box, almost no matter what, it's a penalty. But not if the arm is too close, even if you're literally doing a goalkeeper motion like Calvert-Lewin did, but sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. It's so hard to determine what is and isn't a handball. It's all so confusing. And already this season, the stats bear it out. There's been 6 penalties awarded for handball in the first 30 games. And if you go back 3 seasons in the EPL, there was 6 penalties given for handball the entire season. So this is like truly changing the game in a drastic way. And as I said, we've seen it in the outcome of every single one of these games. This does not seem to be as much of an issue elsewhere besides England. So that's how you know that there's an issue with the referees and there's an issue with VAR and the way that is operated. I mean, there was a reason that no English referees went to the last World Cup. We know that they're kind of garbage. And when they're the ones that are in control of the VAR, it just has not produced the results that you want to see as a fan, because there's no consistency. I think as long as there was a handball rule where it was consistent across the board. You had the same standards for attackers and for defenders, and you saw the same incidents in different matches being called the same way, then people would be more okay with it. Even if that meant a really strict handball rule, if it was at least consistent across the board, I think people would be okay with it. I just don't know what to think anymore. And if you look at the ones given against Dyer especially, where he's just jumping up to try to win a header, his back is to the goal, and it just knocks off his arm from honestly a bad header. Like a couple of the penalty shouts from this weekend, the one with Joel Ward that was given as a penalty for Everton's winning goal, and then the one against Dyer, those are situations where literally the attacking player just made a bad header and they were rewarded for that with a penalty in a play that otherwise would not have threatened. It was very similar with Manchester United and Brighton. I thought Neil Mopai, his arm was really high, and you could see why that one was given as a penalty, but it actually helped Harry Maguire's header be more of a dangerous shot. To me, that should just be a play on. Like, it gave the attacking player an advantage. So I don't really see how that's automatically a penalty. So what's the answer? As I said, I think consistency is the most important thing. But if I could change the rule, here's what I would do with the handball rule. Because I was a referee many, many years ago, but for about a year or two, as a lot of kids growing up who played soccer were. And the way I always called handball was I took three things into account. One is how intentional was it? And that eliminates cases like Eric Dyer, where he's not even looking at the ball and his only intent is to jump with his arms up. And that's how it unfortunately hits his hand. I would also look at proximity. And I think this is something that the refs do take into account. When you're defending somebody from 2 to 3 yards away, there's just no time that you can even move your hands out of the way. And if you're expecting defenders to defend with their hands behind their back, that is just an impossible thing to do. It throws your entire balance off, especially against really good attacking players. It's totally unfair to the defenders. And then the third thing I always looked at is how much did it impact the play? Especially when it comes to a penalty shout. If I were to write the rule, I would say that if a shot is going on target and somebody blocks it with their hand, it has to be a penalty. Because in that case, they're doing something illegal to stop a goal. And then from an attacking player's sense, I think this is where you have to have a little bit of that common sense about how much it impacts the play as well. I think there are times where you're trying to chest the ball down and it's completely accidental, your arm is against your side, and it really doesn't help you control the ball that much. I think there are also times where it's accidental, but it does help you control the ball a lot. And then in that case, even if it's accidental, I think there should be room to give it as a penalty if it helped you score the goal. If it helps you take the ball down and score, like the Kai Havertz one for Chelsea this weekend in their equalizing goal late in that game, then that should be chalked off. I wish there was more common sense applied to it. And honestly, I wish there was a little more room for judgment and room for subjectivity given to the referees, because I think the issue right now is that the refs feel like their hands are tied. When they do have to go to the VAR monitor and look at the play, they know what the rules are. And right now the rules state that pretty much if it hits your hand, it's gonna be a penalty. There's no real room for nuance. There's no room for considering the impact that it might have on the play. And if it were up to me, I would rewrite it so that the referees have a little more control over deciding what is and isn't a handball, because they have the same amount of leeway when it comes to deciding, what slide tackle is a yellow card or not. They have the same thing deciding what is a push and what is not a push. And I feel like they consider a lot of the same factors, so I don't see why we can't give them the responsibility to do that with handball as well. But I've talked about that more than enough. It's frustrating to everybody. I think you can see that with the way I'm speaking about it. And it does, I think, in a sense, ruin the game, because it changed the outcome of so many of these games, especially for a team like Brighton and for a team like Man U. That is a huge 3 points for Manchester United. And quite frankly, they hardly deserved a point from that game. I thought Brighton deserved to win. And same for Tottenham and Newcastle. If it's a struggling season for Newcastle, which it looks like it could be on the books, that was a huge point for them. I just don't want to see the games impacted by this anymore. And it led to a very frustrating weekend of soccer, especially in the Premier League. Now, around the top leagues in Europe, there was a lot of surprises this weekend as well in terms of the results. There were some top teams that went down, and I want to break down which of these you maybe should be concerned about, which ones are not quite as concerning. First, in the Bundesliga, both Bayern and Dortmund lost this weekend. Bayern lost 4-1 to Hoffenheim. Dortmund lost 2-0 to Augsburg. I think of these two, neither one are particularly concerning to me just because we know the track record of these two teams and we know that talent-wise they're so clear of everybody else in the Bundesliga. But if one of them is more concerning than the other to me, it was the Dortmund defeat, because the difference in these two games is that against Hoffenheim, Bayern honestly was outplayed. I mean, they're going to have games with the way that they press so high, where if there are teams that play with confidence and beat their press and can beat them, especially with long balls over the top, there's going to be a lot of open spaces, and that's what happened with Hoffenheim. They exploited it. They created so many chances. It honestly could have been more than 4-1. They outplayed Bayern in that game. The difference with Dortmund is that they had like 80% possession. They had all the shots, and Augsburg was able to beat them on a set piece and a counterattack. And that to me is more concerning for Dortmund, because if you're Dortmund, you have to know that most games are going to be like this. Teams are going to sit in against you. You're going to have a lot of the ball, and you have to be able to break them down. So the lack of creativity showed by Dortmund was much more concerning to me than Bayern losing in that game. But as I said, I think both teams will be all right in the long run. Meanwhile, in England, the WSL was off this week, but there were some FA Cup fixtures. I talked about the Arsenal game in my Arsenal review, so check that out if you haven't already. But the big surprise was Chelsea going down to Everton. Now, we've talked about Chelsea in the other videos, all the star signings they've made, and they're really making a push to both win the WSL and start being competitive in the Champions League. But they couldn't take care of business in the domestic cup this weekend, as Everton actually went down to Chelsea in the 5th minute and then had a really impressive comeback victory. They scored a nice team goal late in the first half, and then in the second half, Valerie Gauvin getting the winner for them, a French international you may remember from the World Cup, and it was a very impressive win for Everton. Now, in terms of level of concern for Chelsea, I wouldn't place this too high because, as I said, I think they're a lot more focused on the league and they're a lot more focused on potentially the Champions League down the line, but they will be very disappointed to have lost that game, especially going up early. More than anything, this is just a huge win for Everton. They move on to the semifinal, and they have a really good draw in the Women's FA Cup as well. The semifinals are Everton against Birmingham City, and then on the other half of the bracket, it's Arsenal versus Manchester City. So it's kind of smaller teams and bigger teams, and it will be a big team versus a small team in the final, no matter who wins each game. But a trip to Wembley on the line for the final, and Everton with a pretty awesome win over Chelsea. And speaking of Chelsea struggling against a smaller team, how about the Chelsea men's team against West Brom? Going down 3-0 in that game. And eventually, Chelsea was able to come back. They tie it 3-3 in stoppage time. As I mentioned, some questions about handball on that final goal. But what a disastrous start for Chelsea. I mean, their new signings, they have not looked good so far, all right? Timo Werner had looked the best of all of them, but he missed a couple of really clear-cut chances in this game. Thiago Silva just gifting West Brom a goal after being given the armband in his first start. So he's had a rough start in England. And then Marcus Alonso looked terrible. He was getting run ragged, and he was at fault for the first goal, and then he ended up getting dragged at halftime for Azpilicueta. Now, if you're so slow that the manager is sitting on the sideline thinking we need to replace you with Azpilicueta, there are some serious problems. So I think Chelsea are in dire need of getting Chilwell in there. And also, speaking of new signings that need to get there quick for Chelsea, Caballero looked terrible. They finally pulled Kepa for this game, and then Caballero gave up a couple of goals where I think he could have done better. They were good finishes from Callum Robinson, but I think Chelsea are really ready for Edouard Mendy to show up from Rennes. Just disaster all around for Chelsea. And look, I said this in the preview, it's going to take them time to gel as a team, and I didn't expect them to really be firing on all cylinders early in the season. That being said, drawing with West Brom, who had lost their first 2 games and not looked particularly good in either of them, very, very concerning. So I would say the level of concern is up a little bit for the Chelsea men's team. However, again, there's still more signings that haven't played a part yet. We haven't even seen Ziyech on the pitch either. Havertz definitely hasn't hit his stride. So, there's still room to grow, but not the start that they would have wanted. And then we couldn't talk about the top men's team in England without mentioning Manchester City. They gave up 5 goals at home to Leicester. And Leicester are no joke. I mean, they've won their first 3 games. They've looked impressive. Obviously, Vardy had a phenomenal game, as he seems to always do against Manchester City. Had him on my fantasy team, so I was pretty gassed about that. But there's some real concern for Manchester City as well, giving up 3 different penalties in this game. And then the other 2 goals were just worldies. One from Vardy, who did a back heel chip flick over Ederson. I don't even know, but that was a crazy, crazy goal. And then James Maddison curling one in from about 22 yards outside the box. Whew! Top bin stunner. I mean, that was beautiful. They got it handed to them. Now City are trying to sign Ruben Diaz, a center back from Benfica. Bro, I don't know if that's gonna help them, because it seems like every center back that City signed don't seem to make that impact. They had Ake back there, and he looked pretty bad. Things just look so shaky at the back for Manchester City, and I think the biggest concern for them in this game was that they went up 1-0 early, and then felt like they gave up a little bit. They looked very complacent, and they looked just happy with it. You know, it's all well and great, Manchester City, when you slap Watford or you slap Norwich last season, and those teams just fold and you end up scoring 7 or 8 on them. That doesn't happen against a team like Leicester City. Leicester took that goal, they took that little punch right to the chin, and they fought back. It was even their former player, Mahrez, and it was a banger from him on the right foot. So that's got to be a demoralizing goal to give up if you're Leicester, and yet they still fought back. Vardy wins the penalty, and then they kicked on from there. Yes, it's early in the season, but the other teams are starting to separate themselves. And I'm sorry, Manchester City, but playing Leicester at home is not going to be the toughest thing you're facing this year. If this remains the pattern, and if somebody like Ruben Diaz can't be the solution to all your problems, it could be a long season. And maybe the City we saw from last year, where they have some games where they just don't quite show up the same way, maybe that's going to be the same City we see this year. So I would say the level of concern is rising for Manchester City as well. So that brings us to goal of the week, and I'll start with Riyad Mahrez. I mean, yes, there were some great goals in that game, but to me, this was my favorite one. I don't know if it was maybe the best goal of the weekend, but there was something about the way that he just thumped it. It felt so disrespectful to me, because there was no reason he needed to shoot it that hard. It was on his weak foot. Usually when it's on your weak foot, you just kind of focus on the technique, get it on frame or whatever. Bro, he lashed that ball. I don't know what that ball did to him before, but he put it the top binsiest of top bins. I loved that goal. Me and Vic, we used to go to this basketball court, and we would just smash volleys back and forth across the court. And it was very reminiscent of that to me. There's just something of that feeling when you just really connect with the ball perfect. And that's what Mahrez did. So that's one of the goals of the week for me. And the other, I gotta give a shout out to my Arsenal ladies, Jordan Nobbs. In a North London derby, in a tight game that was 0-0 at the time, she picked off a pass, saw the goalkeeper was off her line for Tottenham, and just ever so elegantly dinked the ball over from outside the box. I mean, she never looked like missing. She looked so confident in that, and that was a crazy technique from her, but she got the goal. To score that in a North London derby, hey, hats off, Jordan Nobbs, what a goal. So that is my other goal of the week. There was a lot of good goals this weekend, but those 2 take the cake for me. So that's it for this one. Thank you for watching Pitchside Weekly. Of course, I'll be back next week. And as I said, stay tuned for the interview dropping later this week. You don't want to miss it. If you're new around here, subscribe, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.